husband's last words to me were spoken on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when the hospice nurse had stepped out to make a phone call, and the room smelled like the lavender candle our daughter had brought the week before. He looked at me. Really looked at me. The way he hadn't in months because the medication kept pulling him somewhere else, and he said, "The shed. The floorboard near the back wall. Lift it." I thought he was confused. His mind had been drifting in and out for days, and the night before he'd spent 20 minutes asking me where his fishing rods were, even though we'd never owned fishing rods, not once in 43 years of marriage. So I squeezed his hand and said, "Okay, honey, I will." He closed his eyes. 2 days later he was gone. His name was Leonard Howe. He was 68 years old, a retired postal worker who coached Little League on weekends until his knees gave out, who made the same pot of coffee every morning, too strong, always too strong, and who cried at the end of every single Hallmark movie, even though he'd never once admit it. I thought I knew him completely. I didn't go to the shed right away. There was a funeral to plan, and family coming in from 3 different states, and a casserole situation that got completely out of hand. By the 4th day, I had 11 casseroles in my refrigerator and no room for anything else. My daughter, who drove down from Columbus the night Leonard passed, practically moved in for 2 weeks. My son flew in from Portland with his wife and their 2 boys. And the house was full in a way it hadn't been in years, loud and warm and heartbreaking all at once. I told no one what Leonard had said. I don't know why. It didn't feel like a secret exactly. It felt private, like something between him and me that I wasn't ready to share yet, because sharing it would mean doing something about it, and doing something about it meant walking into that shed alone. I waited until the 3rd week of November, a Saturday morning, cold but not yet freezing, the kind of morning Leonard would have spent raking leaves while I brought him coffee in his green thermos. The yard still had leaves on it. I hadn't touched them. The shed was at the back of our property, a 10 by 12 structure Leonard had built himself in 2003, with help from our neighbor at the time, a man named George who moved to Florida years ago. Leonard kept his tools in there, his lawnmower, boxes of things that never quite made it inside the house. I hadn't been in it since before he got sick. It smelled like motor oil and old wood and something else, something I couldn't name, that made my chest tight the moment I stepped inside. I stood there for a minute letting my eyes adjust. The back wall. The floorboard near the back wall. I moved his lawnmower to the side. I pushed a shelf unit a few inches over. And there it was, a plank that sat just slightly higher than the ones around it. Barely noticeable unless you knew to look. I knelt down on the cold concrete and worked my fingers under the edge. It came up easier than I expected. Underneath, in a shallow space maybe 4 inches deep, was a metal box. The kind you'd find at an office supply store, fireproof, with a small combination lock. The combination was not something I knew. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table. It took me 2 days to open it. I tried the obvious combinations first. Our anniversary, Leonard's birthday, my birthday, our daughter's birthday, our son's birthday. None of them worked. I tried 0000. I tried the year we got married. I tried the year we bought the house. On the 2nd day, I tried the year we moved to this town, 1987, and something clicked. Inside the box was a manila envelope, sealed, with my name written on the front in Leonard's handwriting. Under it was a folded piece of paper with a phone number and the name Owen written above it. And under that was a second envelope, smaller, with a rubber band around it and no name at all. I opened the one with my name first. Carol, I want to start with I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I know you're probably sitting at the kitchen table right now. You always do your hard thinking at the kitchen table. And I know your coffee has gone cold because you forgot to drink it. That's how I know it's serious. There are things I should have told you years ago. I kept telling myself I'd find the right time, and then the years went by, and the right time stopped existing, and by then it was easier to just keep things as they were. That's not an excuse, it's just true. The man you married was born Robert Allen Pruitt in Macon, Georgia, on March 3, 1955. I read that sentence 4 times. I legally changed my name to Leonard James Howell in 1981 when I was 26 years old. I have been Leonard ever since. The name I gave you was real. The life I built with you was real. But the name I was born with wasn't the one I gave you, and I've carried that around for 43 years, and I couldn't leave without you knowing. I put the letter down. I looked at my coffee. He was right. It had gone cold. I got up and poured it out and stood at the kitchen sink looking at the backyard for a long time, at the leaves still piled against the fence, at the shed sitting there quiet at the back of the yard. Robert Allen Pruitt, born in Macon, Georgia. I'd been married to a man I had never fully known the name of. I went back to the letter. He didn't explain the name change right away. He wrote around it first, the way Leonard always did when something was hard. He'd approach it sideways, tell you other things first, work his way in. He wrote about how he'd come to love me, specifically. Not in general terms, but in the exact way. The afternoon we met at his cousin's backyard cookout in 1979, the way I'd been wearing a yellow dress and arguing with someone about a movie, confident and a little bit loud, and he'd thought, I want to know everything about that woman. He wrote about the night our daughter was born and how he'd sat in the hospital parking lot afterward and cried by himself for 10 minutes because he was so overwhelmed by how much he loved her. He wrote about the morning our son left for college and how Leonard had driven home alone and hadn't been able to go inside for almost an hour. He wrote, I want you to know that none of what I'm about to tell you changes any of that. Those things were true. They are the truest things I ever had. And then he explained. His real father, his biological father, Robert Pruitt Sr., had not been a good man. Leonard described him carefully, the way you do when you've spent a long time deciding how to talk about something. Violent. Controlling. A man who moved the family every few years to stay ahead of debts and other things Leonard didn't fully understand until he was older. By the time Leonard was 17, his mother had left 3 times and come back twice, and Leonard had learned very early how to make himself small and quiet in whatever house they were in. He left Macon at 19. He spent a few years in different cities, Atlanta, then Birmingham, then Louisville, working whatever jobs he could find. He was Robert Pruitt then, still. He was still connected to that name, to that history, to the possibility that his father might track him down the way he'd tracked down Leonard's mother. That happened once. When Leonard was 24, his father found him in Louisville through someone they both knew, showed up at his apartment, made it clear that he expected Leonard to come home and help support him. Leonard refused. His father got threatening. Not physically that time, but threatening in the way that a person who knows where you live is threatening. Leonard moved again. This time, he changed his name. I know it sounds extreme, he wrote, but I want you to understand who my father was. I want you to understand that it didn't feel extreme then. It felt like the only way to have a life that was actually mine. He became Leonard James Howell in a courthouse in Cincinnati in 1981. He built a new history, not a false one, just a quieter one. He said he was from a small town in Ohio when people asked. He'd grown up mostly in the South but didn't talk about it. He moved to our town in 1983, got a job at the post office, met his co-workers, went to church, became the man our neighbors knew. He met me in 1979, before the legal name change, but under the name he was already building. He had introduced himself as Leonard. When I met you, I was already becoming someone else. And by the time I fell in love with you, Leonard was more real to me than Robert had ever been. I told myself it didn't matter. And then I told myself I'd tell you someday. And then I just stopped. He asked me to forgive him. I set the letter aside and looked at the second envelope, the smaller one with the rubber band. Inside were 3 things, a folded document that turned out to be his original birth certificate. Robert Allen Pruitt, born March 3, 1955, Bibb County, Georgia. A short article cut from a newspaper and a photograph. The article was from 1997, a local paper from somewhere in Georgia I didn't recognize. It was brief. A man named Robert Pruitt Sr. had died in a house fire in his home outside Macon. The cause was listed as undetermined. He was 62. No survivors were listed as undetermined. He was 62. No survivors were listed. I looked at that for a long time. The photograph was of a woman I didn't recognize. She looked to be in her 50s or early 60s in the picture, though I couldn't tell when it was taken. She was standing outside a church, smiling, one hand raised slightly like she'd been caught mid-sentence. On the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, it said, "Mom, Easter 2001. I turned it over again and looked at her face. Leonard had a mother. Somewhere, or at some point, Leonard had a mother who had her picture taken outside a church on Easter Sunday. And that woman had never been mentioned to me in 43 years. I went back to the letter. He had written about her near the end, almost as an afterthought, or maybe because it was the hardest thing. My mother remarried in the late 1980s. I found her again in 1994, after my father had been out of the picture for a few years. We wrote letters. She knew I was Leonard by then. I explained it to her, and she understood it better than anyone would. We stayed in touch quietly. She passed away in 2009. I didn't know how to tell you about her without telling you everything, so I never told you anything. 15 years ago, his mother died 15 years ago, and he went through that grief alone. I thought about all the evenings we'd sat in the same room together. I thought about whether there had been a night, some September night in 2009, when Leonard had been quieter than usual, and I'd assumed he was tired, or that something at work had bothered him. I thought about how many things I'd assumed. The piece of paper with the name Owen and the phone number was the last thing to look at. The handwriting looked newer than the rest, like it had been added more recently. There was a short note below the number also in Leonard's hand. His name is Owen. He's 29. He's a good young man. I met him 3 years ago. I think you should meet him too. I hope you will. I sat with that for the better part of an hour. Then I called my daughter. She drove down the following weekend. I laid everything out on the kitchen table. The letter, the birth certificate, the newspaper clipping, the photograph, the note with Owen's number. I let her read all of it. She was quiet for a long time when she finished. Then she asked me how I was doing. That was the thing about my daughter. Her first question was never about the situation. It was always about me. I told her I didn't fully know yet. I said I'd been feeling a lot of different things in a lot of different layers, and every time I thought I'd gotten to the bottom of one, I found another one underneath it. She asked if I was angry at her father. I thought about it honestly. I think I was, I said. For the first few days. I kept thinking about all the times he could have told me. There were so many years, so many quiet Sunday mornings where we had absolutely nothing to do, and he could have just said, "I need to tell you something." But, she said, but I keep coming back to why he didn't. And I think he was ashamed. Not of what he'd done, not exactly, but of what it meant. That he'd been afraid. That he'd had to run from his own name. I think that was hard for him to say out loud, especially to me. She didn't say anything. He was a proud man, I said. Not arrogant, just, he believed in handling things. Taking care of his family. Being reliable. I think admitting that there had been a time when he couldn't protect himself, when he'd had to just disappear. I think that was a kind of weakness he didn't know how to hand to me. Do you think that makes it okay? I shook my head. No. I think he should have told me. I think I deserve to know who I married. But I also think people are complicated, and I think he loved me, and I think those two things can both be true at the same time. My daughter reached across the table and held my hand for a minute. Then she looked at the piece of paper with Owen's number and asked what I was going to do. I waited 3 more weeks before I called. It rang 4 times and I was halfway to hanging up when someone answered. Hello? He sounded young. Of course he sounded young. And he sounded cautious, the way anyone sounds when an unknown number calls. I said, I'm looking for Owen. My name is Carol Howell. I believe you may have known my husband, Leonard. There was a silence that stretched out for what felt like much longer than it probably was. Yes, he said. I've been. Yeah. I hoped you might call. Owen Pruitt was 29 years old. He worked as an electrician in Macon, Georgia, the same city Leonard had grown up in and spent his life running from. He had a daughter, 4 years old, named Becca. He was not married to Becca's mother. but they were on good terms and co-parented well, he said, in the careful way that people say things they want you to understand correctly. His mother, he told me, had been named Patricia, and she had passed away from cancer when Owen was 15. She and Leonard, he explained, had known each other very briefly in the late 1980s, before Leonard moved to our town, back when Leonard was still figuring out who he was going to be. It had not been a significant relationship, he said, at least not in that way. But there had been a few months when they were close, and then Leonard had moved on, and Patricia had not known she was pregnant until after he was already gone. She had not been able to find him. He was Leonard by then, untraceable. Owen grew up knowing only that his father's name had been Leonard, nothing more. Then, 3 years ago, through one of those genealogy DNA sites, the kind that had become impossible to avoid once they started running television commercials during every football game, a match had come up. A partial match, listed as a probable first-degree relative. On the other end of the match was a profile registered to an account created by Leonard James Howell in 2020. Leonard had taken a DNA test in 2020. He had never told me. Owen had sent a message through the site. Leonard had responded within a day. They had spoken on the phone for the first time a week later. He told me almost everything, Owen said. About his real name, about where he was from, about why he left. He said he wanted me to understand the whole picture. He told you more than he told me, I said. I didn't mean it as an accusation. It just came out. Owen was quiet for a moment. He felt like you'd been through enough together. I think he didn't want to make his last years harder for you. I think he was trying to protect you. I know, I said. That doesn't mean he was right, but I know. We talked for 2 hours that first time. He asked about Leonard, what he was like, what he'd been like as a father, whether he'd been happy. I asked about his life, about Becca, about what he knew of his mother. It was the strangest conversation I'd ever had in my life. Intimate and careful, and also somehow easy, in the way that certain conversations are easy when both people are willing to tell the truth. Before we got off the phone, Owen said, I want you to know, I'm not trying to disrupt anything. I know this must be a lot. I'm not looking for anything in particular. I said, what would you think about meeting in person? He paused. Then he said he'd like that very much. My daughter came with me. We drove to Macon on a Saturday in late January, 12 hours each way, which my daughter thought was too much for one day, so we stayed overnight at a Hampton Inn just off the highway, ate dinner at a Cracker Barrel because I wanted something familiar, and arrived at the diner Owen had suggested at 11 o'clock the following morning. He was already there when we walked in. I recognized him immediately. He had Leonard's jaw, Leonard's way of sitting up straight like someone had told him once that good posture mattered, and he'd never forgotten it. He had none of Leonard's coloring. He was darker, with his mother's eyes, Owen had told me. But the way he held himself, the way he stood up when he saw us come through the door, the way he put his hand out and then seemed to second-guess the handshake and wasn't sure what to do. It was so entirely Leonard that I had to stop walking for just a second. My daughter put her hand on my back. We sat down. We ordered coffee. We talked. He brought pictures of Becca on his phone. She was a pretty little girl, with enormous eyes and a gap between her front teeth and the kind of confidence that 4-year-olds have before the world teaches them to be uncertain. Owen said she liked dinosaurs and macaroni and cheese and absolutely nothing else, which sounded exactly right. We were there for 3 hours. When we left, my daughter hugged Owen goodbye. I held on a little longer than I expected to. I've thought a lot about whether Leonard did the right thing. I've decided I'm not going to answer that in a simple way, because I don't think it has a simple answer. He kept things from me. Big things. The name he was born with, his mother, his son. He made decisions about what I could handle and what he wanted me to know, and that was not his right to do. It was mine. I believe that completely. And also, he was a man who had been afraid for a long time before he found a way to be safe. He built a life that was real. He was a good father and a good husband by every measure I have. He changed the name, but not the character. And when he knew he was dying, he didn't take those secrets to the ground. He pointed me toward the shed. He left the note with Owen's number. He wrote the letter. He left me the pieces. What I did with them was my choice. Owen came to visit last April with Becca. She stood in my backyard and was entirely unimpressed by the flower garden I was very proud of, and extremely impressed by a squirrel, which she chased around the yard for 20 minutes. My daughter came down for the weekend. My son called from Portland and I put him on speakerphone on the porch so he could talk to Owen for the first time. The conversation was long and occasionally awkward and entirely good. Before Owen left, he asked if he could see a picture of Leonard. I took him inside and showed him the framed photograph on the mantel. Leonard at our youngest grandchild's birthday 2 summers ago, laughing at something off camera, wearing the blue sweater I had given him for Christmas. Owen looked at it for a long time. "He looks like a good man," he said. "He was," I said. "He was also a complicated one, but mostly good." Owen nodded. He looked at the photograph a moment longer, and I could see him doing something quiet in his own chest, filing something away, settling something. I recognized it. I'd done the same thing, standing in that shed in November, holding a metal box I hadn't known existed. There are pieces of the people we love that we carry without even knowing what they are. And sometimes those pieces surface in ways we don't expect. In a face that looks like someone we've lost. In a little girl chasing a squirrel across our lawn. In a phone call that lasts 2 hours when it might have lasted 2 minutes. I put a new photograph on the mantel, next to the one of Leonard. It's from Owen's visit in April. Becca is in it, holding a dandelion and squinting into the sun. Owen is standing next to my daughter, both of them mid-laugh at something my son said on the phone, and I'm on the edge of the frame, looking at all of them. The family that Leonard left behind is larger than I knew it was. I'm still getting used to that, but I think I'm glad. I've been asked more than once since all of this came out, whether I feel like I wasted those 43 years. I understand why people ask it. On the surface, it looks like a reasonable question. If the man you built your life with was carrying a different name, a different history, a son he'd never mentioned, doesn't that mean the foundation was wrong? Doesn't that mean the whole thing was built on something false? I don't see it that way. And I've thought about it enough to feel confident saying so. What Leonard kept from me were facts, specific, important facts that I deserved to know. And I want to be clear about that, because I'm not interested in softening it. He should have told me who he was. He should have trusted me with the parts of himself that were hard to say out loud. That was a failure. And the fact that I understand why he made it doesn't mean I pretend it wasn't one. But the man who made that failure was also the man who showed up. Every single day for 43 years he showed up. Not perfectly, but honestly, in all the ways that actually touched our life together. He was present for our children in the specific, irreplaceable way that good fathers are. He was the kind of husband who noticed when something was wrong before I'd said a word. He built a shed in our backyard with his own hands and kept it so orderly you could find anything in it within 30 seconds. Except, it turned out, one thing. What I've come to believe is this: the choices we make over a lifetime either build something or they don't. Leonard made one very significant choice early in his life to run from his name, and then he made a quieter choice to never fully come back from that. Those choices had real consequences. For him, for Owen, for me. That's just true. Consequences don't require anyone to assign blame. They simply follow from what we do and what we don't do, and eventually they surface, whether we intend them to or not. The locked box surfaced. The letter surfaced. Owen surfaced. And here is the part I keep returning to. What I did with all of that was entirely up to me. I could have buried the box again, metaphorically. I could have decided that at 67 years old I had no interest in rewriting my understanding of my own marriage. I could have called Owen once, satisfied my curiosity, and kept my distance. I chose not to do those things. And that choice, my choice, not Leonard's, is what made the difference in how this story ended. I think that's what people miss when they get too focused on what Leonard did or didn't do. Yes, his decisions set certain things in motion. But my willingness to pick up that phone, to drive 12 hours to a diner in Macon, to hold on a little longer when I hugged a young man I'd only just met, that was mine. Nobody handed me that. I had to decide, at an age when most people assume the big decisions are behind them, to stay open. To let something unexpected in rather than closing the door on it. Owen came to visit last spring and stood in my living room looking at a photograph of his father. Becca ran around my backyard chasing a squirrel. My daughter laughed at something my son said on the phone from Portland. None of that would have existed if I had let grief and betrayal be the only things I carried out of that shed. I'm not going to tell you it was easy, but I will tell you it was worth it. And I think Leonard, wherever he is, knew it would be, which is exactly why he told me to lift that floorboard in the first place.